My name is Tony Lodge. I am a research fellow with the Bow Group, the Conservative think tank, and the Centre for Policy Studies. The Bow Group recently published a paper on Nigeria, which is available in the edition of Crossbow. A shorter version is available in the edition of the Crossbow magazine, which is being handed out at the conference. I want to introduce you to the panel in a moment, but I initially just have to explain that the Foreign Office Minister, Tobias Ellwood, sadly cannot be with us this afternoon due to him being in a meeting and events with the Prime Minister and the Conservative Overseas Office. So he has sent his apologies, and I do have a statement from him which I will read out. I am very sorry for not being able to join you today, but I have had to join the party leadership at another event in my capacity as a Foreign Office Minister. I wanted to emphasise in these words, which are being read out, that the British government is fully committed to assisting the democratically elected government of Nigeria in its determination to beat Boko Haram and the scourge of Islamic terrorism across West Africa. Similarly, whether it be Al-Shabaab elsewhere in Africa, ISIL in the Middle East, Al-Qaeda in the Maghreb, and the Muslim Brotherhood, then the British government will provide the necessary resources alongside our allies to expose, challenge and end the scourge of global Islamic terrorism. Anyone who believes that this is not a matter for us here at home must understand that the safety and security of our own country can only be strengthened if we challenge and succeed against international terrorism, so it cannot impact and penetrate our society here in Britain. We must not duck this responsibility, and we won't. And I think that actually that statement was written a couple of days ago, I understand, and it rather echoes what Theresa May has said in the conference today. I will now introduce our panel, our distinguished panel. We have Sasha Jesperson, a research analyst from the Royal United Services Institute, without doubt one of the most important diplomatic, political, military think tanks in the world. Most certainly one of the most prominent ones in Europe. We have Jacob Zenn, an analyst from the Jamestown Foundation in Washington, D.C., an associate of the Henry Jackson Society, and it's Jacob who recently wrote for the Bow Group a month or so ago on Nigeria and the threat of Boko Haram. And finally, we have Andrew Rosindell, MP, Conservative Member of Parliament for Romford, a member of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee in the House of Commons, a former Deputy Chairman of the Conservative Party, and I think it's fair to say, Andrew, one of the strongest supporters of the British Commonwealth, if we can still call it that, in the House of Commons, and the belief that we must do more to help our Commonwealth allies and also address this issue of Islamic fundamentalism both inside the Commonwealth and, dare I say, also here at home in Great Britain and the United Kingdom.
Thank you all for coming along this afternoon. It's great to see such a full room considering the publicity that's been focused on ISIL recently. It's good to see that Boko Haram isn't falling off the agenda. In the last few weeks, there's been a number of mixed reports in terms of what's happening with Boko Haram. There's been some reports that a number of militants have surrendered, that Abu Bakr Shekau who's been killed, but there's also been reports that there's been new attacks across towns in the northeast of Nigeria, so it is clear that the group does still pose a threat. So what I wanted to do this afternoon is focus on the composition of the group, because although it's presented as quite a cohesive group, I don't think it is as cohesive as it first appears. And this provides both an opportunity to address what is going on in northern Nigeria, but also might undermine the aims of the group. So although Boko Haram is driven by ideology, not all of its members are drawn in by this. So throughout its evolution, Boko Haram has benefited from the long-standing marginalisation in northern Nigeria and its inequality with the south. Local populations have been alienated, which has driven them towards the aims of Boko Haram, in particular with its opposition to Western education, but also the wealth that comes with the attachments to this. This has appealed to those that have felt left behind by the Nigerian state. But these members, while they might come in and be connected to the ideology of Boko Haram, they're not necessarily strict adherents to the ideology. In contrast to this, others are actually paid to participate as foot soldiers for the group. So a number of individuals are paid to be lookouts for authorities and to warn the group if the military is in town. There's also been reports of direct recruitment from gangs in Niger and Cameroon. So these individuals are brought on to do particular tasks, but they're not necessarily part of the group as a whole. So once again, they don't adhere to the ideology of Boko Haram. And this involvement of individuals because of either disillusionment with government policy, they feel like they're being left behind, or for money because it's an opportunity that doesn't otherwise exist in the region. This provides an avenue to address what's going on in terms of Boko Haram. The Nigerian government and many international supporters have focused very much on the military response. But this hasn't always been positive. There's been many civilians arrested, tortured, and killed as part of this. And in some instances, this has actually driven more people to support Boko Haram. So there is an option here of providing better opportunities for individuals in the north, working towards equal distribution of resources, which of course is a long-term aim, but it is another strategy in connection with military strategies that could create more of a holistic approach. And then the other side of this disparity between the members that are part of Boko Haram is that it can also undermine the objectives of the group, or it might dilute them. So although Boko Haram has been increasingly militant, so killing people for smoking cigarettes or drug peddling, as well as killing other Muslims and targeting mosques as well as churches, the foot soldiers that don't necessarily adhere to the ideology have been given more freedom. So there's been drug use reported in Boko Haram camps. Now some of these reports are coming from the military, and we've seen in the past that these aren't always supported, in fact, that they could be used as a way of undermining the group. But we've also heard reports from former captives. I was recently in Nigeria and spoke to someone who'd been freed from one of the Boko Haram camps, and she reported widespread drug and alcohol use amongst some of the foot soldiers in Boko Haram camps. And so if the aim for Boko Haram is this Islamic caliphate, which is inspired by ISIL, and with some of the recent advances in northeastern Nigeria, we've seen the encouragement of individuals to remain in the area and to participate in this Islamic caliphate. It'll be hard to get them to adhere to some of the ideological drivers behind Boko Haram if they're not expecting the same from their militants. So although Boko Haram is presented as a cohesive group, there are tensions within, and I think this presents some opportunities to address the group alongside military strategies.
Well, again, I'd like to echo Sasha's thanks to Nigeria First for organizing this event on this important topic at a critical time, about half a year ahead of Nigeria's presidential elections, which will likely be very decisive in determining the future of Nigeria as well as the West African region. I'd like to present some updates about Boko Haram and the security situation in West Africa, as well as emphasize one of my notions about Boko Haram, which is that although the group likely arose because of many domestic factors within Nigeria, and there are many other ideologically similar groups, Boko Haram has many international connections which added fuel onto the fire of this originally local group that has made it the extremely violent group that it is today. In other words, the international connections of the group explain why Boko Haram has become so violent today. It is likely Africa's most violent insurgent group, causing more deaths than any other group on the continent. Now, I believe the group is factionalized, but it should not be considered chaotic or disorganized. Rather, it appears to have a defined leadership structure and a strategy that is coordinated among the various factions. One example of this is with the recent report of the death of the leader, Abu Bakr Shekau. In fact, this was not the leader himself, but an imposter of him. So there are several factions, for example, that all use the name of the leader, Shekau, but all coordinate this with each other to confuse the security forces and international efforts to find the actual leader. So although there are some differences between factions, they do come together for leadership and for major attacks, such as the kidnapping in Chibok, which I'm sure you all have heard of in April 2014, when more than 250 schoolgirls were taken from their school. These girls are only a portion of the several hundred girls, as well as young boys, that have been stolen by the group Boko Haram and taken to Boko Haram's camps across the border. The fact that we have not found almost all of the schoolgirls is a sign of how how Boko Haram's logistics networks are very sophisticated throughout the West African region. Otherwise, you would expect at least some of these girls to be seen, but there are very few reports of girls escaping or being seen. Most recently, Boko Haram has been attempting to coordinate attacks on the capital of Borno State, which is the largest state in northeastern Nigeria. And Boko Haram had been circling the capital, Maiduguri, but over the past 10 days, we've seen some progress in terms of defending that city, and Boko Haram has been rolled back, as well as killing one of the imposters of the leader, Shekau. So this momentum that the security forces have gained in the past week is something that will need to be kept up over the next several months if Nigeria is going to create a security space in the Northeast to be able to hold polls in February 2015. Now I'd like to turn a little bit more to what I talked about in the beginning, which is Boko Haram's international connections. One of the first attacks in Nigeria that first drew Britain into the equation of looking seriously at Boko Haram was the kidnapping of a British and Italian engineer in northwestern Nigeria in May 2011. This was done by a group then called Al-Qaeda in the lands beyond the Sahel. A lot of people at that time overlooked the fact that this was not just a group pretending to be Al-Qaeda, but it was actually a group based on the operational method of Mukhtar Bel-Mukhtar, who's a famous Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb kidnapper. And this kidnapping cell used the same logistics networks as Bel-Mukhtar. It was actually because of the killing of this British hostage that the UK named Boko Haram and its faction Ansaru as terrorist organizations later in 2012. In addition to the connections with Algeria-based Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, Boko Haram has also benefited from some training from the Somali group Al-Shabaab, and this was evidenced mostly in the UN attack, the attack on the UN headquarters in Abuja in August 2011. That was the second suicide bombing in Nigeria's history. The first one occurred in June 2011 at the federal police headquarters, also in Abuja. Many of the weapons that Boko Haram has obtained have come through logistic networks from Libya and the stockpiles of Muammar Gaddafi, funneled through Chad and Cameroon, often through businessmen that are of the same ethnic group of Boko Haram, who sell the weapons to Boko Haram for money or who support the group out of similar ideological objectives. We've also seen Boko Haram extending beyond the West African region. For example, the mastermind behind the bombing of a major market in Abuja several months ago was a UK-born individual who was arrested in Sudan. And there are a number of reports of members of the Boko Haram faction Ansaru being recruited from universities in that country. Beyond Sudan, some of the leading weapons suppliers of Boko Haram are believed to be based in Cairo, Egypt. And well, beyond that, we've also seen some documents emerge that the U.S. website Daily Beast reported on, but this was well known within the U.S. analytical community, that Osama bin Laden, based in Pakistan, had initially provided some seed funding to Salafist organizations in Nigeria. Some of that funding of $3 million went to Boko Haram earlier on. We've seen more recently, the Al-Qaeda generation shift to the ISIL generation, and Boko Haram appears to, at the very least, be taking some of the operational and ideological messages from ISIL in its efforts to currently conquer territory of northeastern Nigeria and hold that territory and replace the emirs of northeastern Nigeria with their own Boko Haram-approved radical emirs. And finally, while we're on the Middle East, there have been some interesting documents uncovered by Cameroonian sources, which do need further corroboration, of individuals flying from Qatar through Libya to Boko Haram bases in Cameroon and helping Boko Haram with funding, particularly with laundering used cars from the Nigeria-Cameroon area to the Middle East. Now, all of these international connections have a decent amount of corroboration to them, but would benefit from further international efforts to uncover the global operations of Boko Haram, how it funds itself, how it recruits, and how it trains. And that's why in the Bogu report of several weeks ago, we did call on further efforts by the UK and the West and Nigeria and its allies to form a coalition to research more deeply into Boko Haram's international networks and try to cut them off. That may help to defeat Boko Haram, as well as some of its allied members on this poisonous tree of extremism. Thank you.
Before I begin, may I thank our two previous speakers, Sasha from RUSI and Jacob from the Jamestown Foundation. I think their analysis and background to the whole situation in Nigeria was excellent. We've heard today the facts of what Boko Haram and those associated with them are doing to destroy that country. And if we don't act, and if we stand by and watch and fail to grasp the seriousness of this problem, then a country with whom we have had close links to for many, many years, Nigeria, could end in civil war. We could see the breakup of that country, which is now the most prosperous nation in Africa. And so we in the United Kingdom simply cannot stand back and watch a Commonwealth ally have to deal with a situation in which they are ill-equipped to tackle without giving them the support and the backup that they need. And I went to Nigeria last year as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee of the House of Commons. We were doing a report about terrorism in West Africa, and of course the place we had to visit was Nigeria. So the committee visited Kaduna and Abuja, and we met at first hand people that have had experience of what Boko Haram are doing to the people of Nigeria, in particular in the Borno province in the north, and the appalling acts of wickedness that they are perpetrating against innocent people in that country. And we have seen it ourselves with the abduction of 240 young girls. We see appalling murders taking place, villages being ripped to pieces and innocent people being butchered. Exactly the same style of terrorism we are now witnessing before our eyes in the Middle East, in Syria and Iraq with the actions of ISIL. But the one difference, in my opinion, between what is taking place in the Middle East and what is taking place in Nigeria is that we have a greater responsibility, I believe, as a nation that has had such strong and close links to Nigeria, it being a former British colony and a current cherished member of our Commonwealth, that we should neglect that country at this time, I think is completely wrong. We need to do more. We need to hold out the hand to our friends in Nigeria and give them the support they need to tackle this appalling situation. Because if we don't, we will suffer the consequences in our own country. We would have, if things turn out as I fear they might, unless we act, we would of course have many people wanting to leave Nigeria and come and live in the United Kingdom. There would be an exodus of people wanting to leave Nigeria. We would see a country which is a rich nation, the richest nation in Africa, disintegrating before our eyes. We would see the most appalling human rights abuses get worse and worse, and not just hundreds and thousands of people suffering. You're talking about potentially hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people suffering in a most appalling way. So we do, as a government in the United Kingdom and as a nation, have to hold out our hand of friendship to our Nigerian friends and take firmer action than we have been taking so far. And I know that some will say that the human rights record of Nigeria isn't the best. Well, I would have to say to those who put that point to me that however bad the human rights record of Nigeria may be, and however bad accusations are being levelled against the Nigerian armed forces about the tactics they use, it can't be nearly as bad as what we see from Boko Haram. And we have to be realistic about this. We have to work with the Nigerian armed forces and the Nigerian government to help them and train them and give them the direction they need in order to defeat this evil organization. Nigeria, along with the United Kingdom, are members of a great family, a family of nations and territories around the world, which was founded through the British Empire, which is now a commonwealth of nations, of equal nation states. But we have so much in common: a common language, a common heritage, a common judicial system, many of which has been tweaked and slightly changed depending on the country. It's not exactly the same, but nevertheless we have the basis of a common way of governing our countries. And so through the Commonwealth, we should be doing a great deal more. We have, sadly, in this country, neglected the Commonwealth of Nations, a group of countries that actually, when you look at the statistics of this, are the emerging economies of the future. We have, of course, as we all know, focused our attentions rather more on the continent in the last 30 or 40 years and ignored countries around the world that we have so much in common with and an historical link to. And Nigeria is an example of that. So we need to shift our policies on this to be more proactive and more willing to help those who need our help in their hour of need, our friends in Nigeria. Now, I'm a member of Parliament, and I've noticed in the last few years just how many Nigerians are now living in my constituency. And I welcome that because I'm glad to say they mostly vote Conservative. And they also are very proud people who share Conservative with a small c values. They go to church, they're patriotic, they love the Queen, they are proud of being here in Britain, and they're actually rather more Conservative than many people in our own country, and they play a positive role in our society. And I want to say to the Nigerians in Britain that we must stand with them, shoulder to shoulder, to help them defeat this evil. We have responsibilities, of course, to play our part in the Middle East as well, but in Nigeria's case, we have a particular link which I think can help our friends in Nigeria to defeat Boko Haram and to rid that country of these people. I'm delighted that Nigeria First has organised this fringe meeting at Party Conference. We need more information. We need to get this out into the eyes of the public. We need the party members to know more about what is going on in Nigeria. Very little publicity is given to Nigeria because we are now looking at what's happening in the Middle East far more. And I understand why that is, but we must ensure that we don't look at ISIL in isolation, that we realise that Islamic terrorism is not something purely taking place in the Middle East. Africa is a particular part of the world where this is growing. Boko Haram in Nigeria, Al-Shabaab in Somalia, spreading over into Kenya, Al-Qaeda, of course, in the Maghreb area, in Yemen. We have a problem on our hands. But in Nigeria's case, Britain is particularly well placed to help our Nigerian friends. I met the Nigerian general who is in charge of tackling Boko Haram, and we rather horribly had to watch some of the videos of what Boko Haram do. And I won't go into the details, but you can imagine the type of things they do when they capture Christians and they capture Nigerian police, and how they act and how it ends up. And you can imagine the horrifying pictures that I have witnessed in Nigeria on video, captured from Boko Haram camps that have been attacked by the Nigerian armed forces. And the Nigerian general that I met said to me, "You are from Britain. Why have you deserted us? Why are you not here helping? You're here for your report, but where is the British armed forces to advise us, to help us, to guide us? We're not asking you to fight, but we need your assistance." So that told me very clearly, it gave me a very, very powerful message that our duty is to help our friends in Nigeria, because if we don't do so, this will rebound on our country as well. Nigeria is a member of the Commonwealth and a country with whom we have a duty to stand by. And I hope the Conservative Party and our Conservative-led government will take the lead in doing so.
We have two people doing Anas al-Tikriti and Azam Tamimi, I understand, residing in London. Michael Gove famously wrote Celsius 7.7. The Americans, I know, Jacob, are very concerned about London being a base for Islamic fundamentalist groups. Would you have an opinion, slightly aside from Nigeria, on this rise of London and Britain perhaps as being has become something of a safe house for the wrong organizations?
Mm-hmm. Well, on the factual level, I do think it is very clear that a lot of international Islamist extremist groups have taken advantage of a city like London or a country like the UK in order to establish headquarters there. I work a lot in regions like Central Asia where these groups are active more operationally, whereas in the UK they're active more in rhetoric. And you can see the fear that countries in those regions have of these groups. I'm talking about ones like Hezb Tahrir. And while I can see some benefit in these groups being above ground in that it makes it easier to monitor them, a lot of their speech is not just violent and inflammatory, but it does violate international law. And I do think you can make a strong legal case that these groups can be banned. And then I think it comes down to a policy decision about what would be the best mechanism of countering it and then banning it so that these groups don't engage in violence and so forth.
Further, we'll go back to the previous question. I do think we should ban organisations that are facilitating this kind of thing in our own country. I think we have been far too soft for far too long on a whole range of things, and this is one of them. And I think if we were to take action, it would not only be the right thing to do, be the popular thing to do amongst the British people, and would show that the Conservative government in this country is not going to tolerate such criminality from within our own shores. So we should take much firmer action, and yes, if necessary, ban individuals and organisations from operating in this country. In terms of Islam and the actions of these Islamic jihadist groups, we all know, and we know that from the situation with Northern Ireland, that criminality is often dressed up as religion. So we know from what happened in Northern Ireland that the IRA, the INLA, and the terrorist groups there were hiding behind religion in order to pursue their own criminal causes. And I think that the same can be said of this. Obviously, I'm not from the Islamic faith, but I do speak to people who are from that faith. And most I speak to utterly condemn what we have been witnessing in the Middle East and in Nigeria. And I don't believe that we can say that in any sense that the actions of Boko Haram are actions of the Muslim religion. They are actions of individuals and organizations and people with evil intentions using religion in order to pursue their own agenda. And it's, as often is the case, it's about power, it's about money, it's about control. And religion is the vehicle for this. Of course, there are people that are in our own country who are spreading the language of hatred, and we cannot stand by and let these people continue to do so, because if we do, it's an open invitation for people to come to this country and to operate from within our shores, and that is something we cannot stand by and watch.
Sasha.
And just to add, to bring it back to Boko Haram, there was actually an article in a local newspaper this week or last week with Islamic scholars highlighting how Boko Haram diverges from Islamic teaching. So I don't think we can lump it all in the same of saying that this is representative of Islam. And so while it might be beneficial to ban certain organisations that are connected with particular practices, I think this needs to be made clear that it is not connected to the Islamic religion.
All Progressive Congress, which is the opposition party in Nigeria, they are anxious to grab power. Now, President Jonathan is taking action against Boko Haram. Of course, we have a government in Nigeria which is not as functional as it should be. There is a lot of things going on in Nigeria that make government very hard to operate in the same way that we would do so in the United Kingdom. But President Jonathan is trying to take action, in my view, but it's not enough. Much more needs to be done, and the All Progressive Congress has serious question marks over its legitimacy, in the sense that they are clearly not taking or willing to take action to deal with this, and they are almost, in many senses, without stating myself what's actually going on. I'm not there to witness it, but clearly there are serious questions about what they're up to and where this is leading, and if they were to get power, where this would actually end. So there are, as our friend here, if you are from Nigeria, obviously, our friend here has clearly raised a serious point. What we can do about it is your question. Well, we can't interfere in a sovereign nation. We can't take action against a political party we feel is acting in a way that is detrimental. But of course we can raise these concerns, and that is something we must certainly do, and it's something I am doing with our own Foreign Office.
I could add 2 points to those very clear to this very clear response, and one is that, as I mentioned before, a lot of the individuals, including opposition politicians, that have been associating with Boko Haram in one way or another, have also been doing so on an international basis, traveling to other countries, receiving funding from other countries. And this is something where the international community can bring its intelligence efforts together and to raise awareness, to uncover these links, and to expose them. At the same time, it's also important for the Nigerian government itself to be transparent about those individuals who are accused of these links and to explain the evidence in a public court. And I think that would bring some clarity to these links and help expose it. Yeah, you know, the French intervention in northern Mali in early 2013 was very successful. It's still too early to tell whether it's going to be successful in the midterm, but it did remove Al-Qaeda in Islamic Maghreb from that region, and however, it did disperse them. And as a result, some Nigerians who were in northern Mali returned to Borno State, Nigeria, and brought some skills from that theater to Nigeria. So this does bring up the issue, however, of not just carrying out an intervention like what we saw in Libya, but also preparing for the next day. I don't think that Nigeria is in a position where it is asking Britain to send in troops like what France had permission in northern Mali. And I think at the present time, the best way that Britain and other countries can help is with satellite imagery that can help track down Boko Haram convoys, and other indirect methods such as providing intelligence, necessary training, lethal and non-lethal equipment, and so forth. But we haven't reached that point of urgency yet, but it is important to continue the collaboration moving forward.
I would just agree with Jacob's comment that it's too early to say whether or not the intervention is successful as a whole in Mali, particularly as some of the factors that contributed to the crisis in the first place haven't been addressed by the French and haven't been considered as part of the broader intervention. And so I think that would be an important element in any, I guess, heightened engagement in Nigeria, that these factors would need to be brought into consideration as well. I think the European Union can play quite a significant role in that it has a strong presence in the country. So the delegation is based in Abuja, and a lot of member states have representatives as well. So in terms of a footprint on the ground, they're more engaged with what's going on. And the UK representative is connected to that as well. So there is definitely, I guess, room for contributing to any EU strategy. But I guess in terms of specific strategies, you might be better placed.
Right. Well, Going back to the previous question, we talked about France, has a history in northern Mali, in Mali and the Francophone countries, so it can play a unique role. Britain has a unique history with the Commonwealth and Nigeria, so it can play a unique role as opposed to other countries. So I do think Britain can take a leading role, but the EU does bring together a lot of resources that can be used to counter Boko Haram and extremism more generally, particularly with non-kinetic approaches. So currently the EU is setting up programs in Abuja to analyze what Boko Haram is doing, to analyze its messaging and counter its messaging, and to work with local civil society groups on the ground to counter Boko Haram more broadly. And I think at current that is one approach that the EU can take within Nigeria, and then we'd have to look at EU internal politics within Europe to see what approach it would take towards tackling extremism within this continent.
Well, if the EU want to help, that's great. But I think that the main focus of our help for Nigeria should be through the Commonwealth. I think that the Commonwealth should have a greater role in situations like this. I think I have to say I'm not that confident the EU are going to do that much to help us in this situation. But I think the Commonwealth has a pivotal role to play. If only we realised that and developed it in such a way, I think that countries like Nigeria would benefit from assistance from Commonwealth countries that have similar historical background. But of course, we have allowed the Commonwealth to be neglected and not to be developed in the way that we could have done. We could have developed the Commonwealth in all sorts of areas, not least for trade, but also for security and common assistance when a country is in distress such as this. Similar way to, I'm not suggesting it would be like a NATO, but in a similar way that when a country does have problems and needs urgent support, advice, expertise, there should be a Commonwealth assistance programme and collaboration between allies within the Commonwealth to help countries like Nigeria. And I'd like our government and our party, perhaps in our next manifesto, to give much greater prominence to developing the importance of the Commonwealth in a whole range of areas, not least to deal with situations like this.
Any sort of assistance or intervention would likely be precipitated by an invitation from the Nigerian government, and this would diffuse any type of propaganda that the country's that Britain or any other country is unwanted if it came with a formal invitation. Second, there's a big opportunity for strategic alliances between countries like Kenya, countries like Nigeria, that are facing similar crises related to terrorism. I mean, when you look at, as I mentioned, the UN attack, this involved Al-Shabaab, a group that Kenya is fighting. And you look at the Westgate Mall attack several months ago in Kenya where many people were killed. That type of lesson was learned by Boko Haram, and it was attempted to be implemented. Instead, there was a major bombing at a mall in Abuja several months ago. So I mean, it is these types of links that bringing countries together can actually be effective, and this type of exchange of information. And especially when you form alliances with Muslim groups in the country, it makes it more difficult for Boko Haram to use Muslim terminology to say that these people aren't Muslims and are helping us out and this is wrong. And there are these alliances with Muslim communities in Nigeria and other countries that are victims of terrorism.
And just to pick up on the second point of your comment, in terms of regional contributions to any kind of intervention, the Economic Community for West Africa States has been discussing contributing troops to Nigeria and supporting any kind of action that was going on. There isn't currently a standing force, so actually putting that into action hasn't been easy, and now with travel restrictions around Ebola, it's even more difficult. But Cameroon and some of the surrounding states have been assisting Nigeria with that.
Politicians, with respect, Andrew, tell us that this is what we need to do. But I think the interesting question is, and there is an issue which I'm afraid can't be avoided, which is the last 10 years of rather savage defence cuts. It's we had Britain was particularly celebrated in West Africa with its Sierra Leone help. It provided with a seaborne invasion to help the elected government of Sierra Leone in 2001, which was seen as a very, very good example and model of how to do it. But what actually can we do, Andrew? And is our overstretch perhaps a problem?
Well, of course it is. And we have, under both the previous Labour government and under this government, made huge cuts to our national defences. Now, I don't disagree that changes had to be made to the MOD and to the way we operate our defences. It was costing a huge amount of money, and money was not being spent in the most effective way. But we have now cut way beyond where we should have cut, far too deep. And we can't act in the way that we would have perhaps acted in the past to deal with situations such as this, and others that directly affect the United Kingdom. For instance, it's questionable whether we could mount a similar operation to rescue the Falkland Islands should there be an invasion of the Falkland Islands again today. I'm not sure we could do the same thing as we did in 1982. So our defence cuts have been, a lot of them have been mistaken, and I think it has diminished our ability to take necessary action as and when we need to, and a Conservative government should be building up our defences, not cutting them back. But in short, I'd love to see us do more, but we are constrained by our own resources. Of course we are. It's no good politicians making all kinds of promises that we can't fulfil because the ability and the resources are not available to do it. But what we can do, and what we should be doing, we should be advising, we should be assisting in all sorts of ways. We should be using our expertise and knowledge and providing equipment and resources where possible to help Nigeria tackle the situation.
Sasha, as Britain's leading defence and military think tank, if that's fair, what does RUSI, the Royal United Services Institute, think is within Britain's capability? So in effect, it can help in a material way.
I'm going to take this in a slightly different direction, but just to build on the comments already, that I think that we have an opportunity here to move beyond just a strictly security or military response and engage with some of the other factors, such as the contributing factors that have created this problem, and working with other UK functions in the country. So DFID at the moment is engaged in a project to do insecurity mapping throughout Nigeria, working with local partners to see if there are other opportunities to address some of these issues. So rather than just focusing on, say, military capabilities that may be limited right now, I think we should be thinking more broadly to do a balanced approach to this.
So your a key emphasis there on the better targeting, perhaps, and better use of overseas aid.
Yes, but also using what capabilities we have in a cohesive way so that they're contributing towards the same outcome.
Interventions on that scale do require a call for help. And that actually is why the action is taking place in Iraq and Syria at the moment, in that sense that the present-day Iraqi Prime Minister has asked for help, and that does often change the dynamic. But if I can ask the panel.
Yeah. Well, I would point out, one, that Nigeria has played a crucial role in securing West African security in previous decades in Sierra Leone, and from my discussions with members of the Nigerian military, they often feel not thanked enough. And I think this goes towards building good governmental and human relationships between Americans, people in Britain and Nigeria, so that we understand where everyone's coming from. And now Nigeria sees itself in a time of need with respect to Boko Haram and other security crises, and this is where having good relations with Nigeria could allow us to support them now that they're in a time of need.
I've tackled this issue myself with our High Commissioner in Nigeria and with the former Foreign Office Minister, Hugh Robertson, who was tackling this as well. And I'm afraid we have come up against the view in the higher echelons of government that that human rights is an issue with Nigeria. So we are putting that in the mix, which means that governments such as ours are not so keen to give the assistance that Nigeria needs. Now, I take the view that we have to be realistic about the situation. No, Nigeria doesn't have a perfect human rights record by any means, and certainly the Nigerian military cannot be said to have the same standards that perhaps the British military may have. But at the end of the day, we have to be realistic about this and work with the Nigerian authorities in order to defeat Boko Haram, whose human rights record is minus, let alone any level. So, frankly, for us to not help Nigeria on the basis that there are issues with human rights in Nigeria at this point, I think is being idealistic and short-sighted, and we should be there helping Nigeria.
I think that's why there is a key role for the UK in supporting the Nigerian military, so that it is a response that fits in with what we would expect from British troops. And so there's reports coming out recently that Nigerian military and the security services are going to Russia to be trained. And so if the UK takes a more active role, at least then there is some control over what kind of training is delivered and what skills are passed off, as opposed to a country like Russia that would have an even worse, say, human rights record in terms of military engagement.
Yeah, I would echo what Sasha said. That is an important point, that if countries like the US and the UK don't get involved, Nigeria will look to others to help it out. And I've noted, increased Chinese support, naval armaments, and then this leads to greater influence. And then in terms of, the strength of the Commonwealth, for example, it becomes weaker if we let countries like Russia and China gain more influence in Nigeria. And then one point on the human rights issue that I think requires some innovative thinking is that one way to do it is to teach about human rights to the Nigerian security forces, but I don't know how effective that is. But one thing that they do need in order to be better at human rights is better facilities in terms of prisons, better detention centers. Because currently, when they capture Boko Haram members, there's actually no place to take them. You either let them go, you kill them and violate human rights, or you take them to a shoddy prison and Boko Haram rescues them and kills the security officers. So one way to indirectly improve human rights is to improve the facilities around human rights, in addition to perhaps lessons about it.
Well, thank you very much indeed, everybody, for coming. It's been a fascinating hour. I hope you've all enjoyed it, and I think the questions have been excellent. We have a presidential election in Nigeria on February 14th next year. The run into that, I think we all hope, will be as calm as it can be. And obviously, the plan from Nigeria First is to monitor that and do more events like this. So thank you all very much for coming.
Thank you.